Okay, hi everyone. Sorry to have to do another video, but as I said, I need everyone to be at a certain place so that we can move on together. The aim for that is Wednesday of this week, so hopefully this won't be a very long podcast. What I've done is I've just copied and pasted the instructions for the planning of your essay on Ode to a Nightingale into another document so that I can add and jot down some notes at the bottom of the page as I speak, so that you've got something visual to sort of make the planning process clear. Essentially, what you're going to try and do is plan an essay, a full essay for Ode to a Nightingale, and write the first few paragraphs. You can write more if you like, but really I just need to see you attempting to draw out the things that need to be drawn out in an essay and have enough paragraphs. So 2 is probably enough. 3 is ideal, but 2 is enough, just to show that you understand that there isn't a particular structure or style or pattern to a literature essay like there is to an English one. And being able to see that the 2 paragraphs have a slightly different approach is the ideal way to do that. So what you're probably used to, as I explained in class today, is that with an English essay you would have a prompt. Is Shylock an evil character? Discuss. And that's really what the essay wants you to do. But with a literature essay, there is no prompt. Where the new study design differs, I guess, in that is that you have to respond to critical theory and other people's perspectives. So what I have here is one perspective, and we'll just deal with this one first. And this perspective is a fairly simple one, so it just reads, and unlike the Star Wars one, this is a real one. It's come off the internet. Ode to a Nightingale describes a series of conflicts between reality and the romantic ideal of uniting with nature. That's really just telling you what you need to know. The next part is really the part that you're going to respond to. In the words of Richard Fogel, the principal stress of the poem is a struggle between ideal and actual, meaning that the speaker is torn between what he desires and what is attainable. So this phrase here is the prompt. In other words, this is someone's reading of the poem. This is someone's response. The idea that the poem has this tension in it between ideal and actual, and this second section, meaning that, is really just another way of saying that he's torn between what he desires and what is unattainable. So that's a little bit more of a basic way of saying it. Planning this out is very, very easy. So what you're probably used to doing is breaking down a prompt into several statements or several assumptions, key questions, and then planning a paragraph around each of those. Well, this is a bit different in that it only has one idea. So I'm going to just make at the bottom of this page a table, and you could do this on an A4 page just by breaking it up into 4 columns, but obviously I can't do that. So let me insert a table here, and that table is going to have 4 columns, and normally we would aim to have about 8 paragraphs, so I'm just going to do 8 paragraphs, 8 lines. There's 7 by the time I've done my headings, but 7 lines down here. In that first prompt, just ignore this one, this prompt, we'll label it prompt number 2 for the moment, just ignore that. But for prompt number 1, or perspective number 1, the way that I would plan that is I would make this first section moments. This is the column going down. I'd make the second one ideas, so the ideas that are raised in those moments. I'd then make this third column, or we can call this one ideas or impact. And then the third column will be our evidence that we're going to use, and the fourth column will be our deconstruction. Okay, so what I would do in here is in that first prompt, because there's only one idea, I'm going to work through the poem in order. So it might be I'm going to work through stanza 1, okay, of Keats's piece. Or in the example that you've just looked at of mine, I'm going to work through the moment on Hoth or in the ice cave, right? That was what I covered in paragraph 1. I'll keep using the Star Wars example as my example because it's a bit easier given that I haven't actually planned out an essay on the Keats poem. In terms of the ideas, what I wanted to explore in that first paragraph of the Star Wars essay was I wanted to look at the idea. Essentially, the whole essay was about looking at the idea of inner strength. So I'm just going to type in inner strength. Oh, strength. We'll get there eventually. Strength. And I might provide some elaboration on that because I was particularly looking at the idea that it's hidden inside, right? So let's say that's for it. That's the point that I want to make. That's the, if you like, that's the interpretation of the text that I'm going to offer that's explored within that moment. That's the impact that that moment of the film had. If I was talking about Keats, it might be, stanza 1, and I might like to talk about the idea that, he's depressed. Yeah. Now the evidence is obviously a quote. So in this one, it might be a quote, it might be a line, it might be a word. In a film, you're more likely to use images. So in this one, it was, say, the moving the lightsaber. Now I might have more than one. So I also had in there the evidence of what was it? The voice listening to his guide. Yeah. Okay. So I'm keeping it just as a specific moment. So I've got the broad scene, Hoth and the ice caves. I've got the impact that it has. Once I finished that scene, I knew that he had some inner strength. I knew that it was hidden deep inside himself and he could draw on it. And I've talked about 2 moments of evidence, moving the lightsaber, listening to his guide. Those actually happen in the other order. So I'm just going to pick that up and move that, or at least I talk about them in the other order, but you get the idea. In my deconstruction, what I would note here, and it's a bit easier for you because you're going to be handwriting, not typing, so I just draw a little arrow across. I would make some note here about what I'm going to do with that piece of evidence. So listening to the guide, I'm going to talk about the fact that the voiceover equals not only his inner self, but drawing on memory, right? And then moving the lightsaber, I'm going to talk about closing eyes equals concentration and trust, right? Whatever it might be. So those sorts of notes are what I'm going to make for each paragraph. So my paragraph for paragraph 1 is going to focus on Hoth and the ice cave. That is the context. My interpretation is going to be around inner strength and the fact that he has a power hidden inside that he can draw on. My evidence is going to be those two specific moments within that 10-15 minute scene, and my deconstruction of each of those moments is indicated there. I can then go and write that paragraph quite confidently and sort of have a roadmap, I guess, of where I'm going to go. I'll get rid of this highlighting so that you're not continuously drawn to that phrase. But the second prompt is harder. It is a harder prompt, and I will tell you for the most part when I give you a SAC if there's a hard and an easy prompt. And some of you will just want to get the basics down, and others will feel confident and want to challenge yourself. But this is a harder prompt, and I've given you 2 because this one would require a slightly different process for planning, and this might help you at a later stage in the year when you do get harder prompts. And as I said, I don't know what the prompts on the exam are going to be, so they could be easy like the one above, or they could be harder and present several ideas. So that is the difference in this prompt, is that it presents several ideas, not the single idea that the prompt above gave. So it reads, Walter Jackson Bate believes that the Elysian Fields and the Nightingale Song in the first half of the poem represent represent a pleasurable moment that overwhelm the individual like a drug. However, the experience does not last forever, and the body is left desiring it until the narrator feels helpless without the pleasure. Instead of embracing the coming truth, the narrator clings to poetry to hide from the loss of pleasure. So there's actually several several ideas within that. So there's an interpretation of the poem that's offered. Pleasurable moments that overwhelm, like a drug, is one of them. So we'll highlight that. I'll use yellow for that one. The experience does not last forever. That's another. The next bit after that is an elaboration. And then instead of embracing the coming truth, the narrator clings to poetry to hide from the loss of pleasure, is sort of the result of those two. So the yellow is one idea, the green is another, and the blue is, I guess, the culmination of those two ideas working together. So all that changes here in this table, you still use a table with the same headings, but all that would change is that this column and this column will change places. So all I'm going to do is come up with perhaps the ideas that I want to deal with in the sequence that I want to deal with them, and then connect them to the moments. So unlike the first prompt, I probably wouldn't be necessarily working through the film, if it was a film, the novel, if it was a novel, or in this case, the poem, in sequence. So that's what makes it harder. It makes it more complex, but generally speaking, the more complex essays that move around the text confidently, they tend to get the better marks. So if I was doing this essay and this style of essay on the Star Wars film, I might talk about hidden strength inside. I might talk about that for a couple of paragraphs, but then I might talk about further into the essay. I might want to talk about inner strength supported by others. And then I might finish up by talking about inner strength. So my whole essay is about inner strength. Oh, still can't spell strength. Inner strength maybe gets results, right? Well, I think that's roughly what I talk about in that essay. So imagine those are my ideas or the impact of the text. Where does this come up? Well, it comes up in the ice caves. It perhaps comes up in the carbonite chamber. Nope. Can't believe I spelled carbonite wrong. Carbonite chamber, I'll think of one other in a moment. Supported by others, the second paragraph about Dagobah. And Yoda comes up there. It also comes up, perhaps supported by others. It might be that idea of in the X-Wing with R2-D2. Now, importantly, the Dagobah example actually happens after he's in the X-Wing going to Dagobah. So I might, within the 1 point, change the order of those two around. Because I want to keep a logical sequence where I can and sort of piggyback on the logic of the film. He begins to rely on R2-D2, or he looks for reliance on R2-D2 for his inner strength, sort of confirmation, if you like, in the X-Wing, and that increases when he gets to Dagobah by having to rely on a tutor, a guide, a mentor who doesn't at first seem to be reliable. But if you see here, this carbonite chamber happens at the very end of the film. He draws on some hidden inner strength inside that he didn't realize he had there when he at first confronts Darth Vader. So I might, that's jumping around. Hoth, X-Wing and Dagobah are in order, but jumping to the end of the text there makes perfect sense. I might also, thinking about that, move that one down and actually put here the cave on Dagobah, because he confronts Darth Vader without expecting to and fails. So the idea here could be he's got inner strength and can draw on it to survive. It's hidden. It's hidden because he doesn't know he has access to it. So in the cave in Dagobah, he can't access it because he doesn't know how. But then contrast that with the carbonite chamber on Bespin in the Cloud City, where he actually can draw on that in the same confrontation. So I can jump around, and then that paragraph there is now following the sequence of the film around that idea. This paragraph here is now following the sequence of the film around that idea, and I'd do the same for here. Notice that I wouldn't change the evidence and deconstruction. They happen in the exact same way. But the idea here is to go, here's an idea, it's raised in the film, or in your case, you're going to be doing in the poem in these few ways, in these few moments, and you might progress the logic through. And then another idea, they may be like these ones, related. So I'm guessing that if you're doing this prompt, you would have poetry means that he hides from pleasure, and that might be a warning. So there's a warning in hiding from loss. And then you might have a few paragraphs around the moments where pleasure overwhelms him, and you might have a few paragraphs around the idea that the experience doesn't last forever. And in the yellow paragraphs, you might move through where those moments, those ideas are raised in order, and then you might continue to move through. You might restart the poem and look at just the moments that are relevant to the green and move through those in order, eventually ending up with having explored how Keats is hiding from the loss of pleasure and not confronting that idea, and how that's a problem. Okay, so hopefully that explains how you plan an essay and how you lay it out. This is a little bit clunky on a computer, so it's much, much easier to lay this out by hand. Obviously, it's harder to move those ideas or these moments around, but all you can do, if I hadn't have moved those, so I will undo those changes. So if I hadn't have undone those, I could just do this and just go, this is idea number 2 in that sequence of paragraphs, and this is idea number 1. I want to include here the Dagobah caves. So I'm going to do this one as number 1. Whoop, 1. That's going to come third. And this is going to be second. And that allows me to see the sequence I want to deal with them in, because the plan is going to be as your thoughts occur to you. You can do the same thing with your evidence. I might want to move the evidence around, so I think I moved those 2 before. I could just put an A and a B, for instance, in my pen, and do the same thing with the deconstruction. Okay, so you're going to have Wednesday's class to have a go at doing this, and then writing a couple of paragraphs, and hopefully handing me something by the end of the week that shows the writing on that. But the more of the plan that you've got done on Wednesday, and the earlier you can get started with your writing, the easier it will be, because you'll be able to get some help. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope that made sense. Give it a go and ask questions on Wednesday.